Welcome to part 3 of this special 3-part series with Charlotte Grimmel, psychology-based coach for female founders. Now, part 1 was all about failure, how to deal with it. Part 2 was growth mindset, showing up every day a little bit stronger, even when you feel like things aren't going your way. And today is going to be all about the success blockers, the self-sabotaging things we do, like perfectionism, like procrastination, that get in the way of our success and what we can do to get past them. Really actionable, this one. You will find a lot of value in this one as well as the other part of the series. Let's get started. Are there any other self-sabotaging behaviors or success blockers that you talk about where we get the language mixed up? So you mentioned high standards and perfectionism. They're not the same, but that's like an easy way for us to justify it. Is there anything else like that where we call it something, pretend it's synonymous, or we really believe it, but it's not, and it kind of holds us to be trapped?
I think yes, and also probably not, as I think that is the most drastic one, I want to say, because there's this glorification of high standards / perfectionism. There's probably also a glorification of busyness that I think is actually can often actually also be self-sabotage, because I can keep myself busy, but I can actually also use that as a way to keep myself from doing the important things. So I could have, oh my gosh, I'm like running around, I'm doing all the things, but like the thing I never get to is the thing I need to actually do, And so then there's a self-sabotage in there. I do also think like imposter syndrome is completely misunderstood, like thinking about I'm a fraud, and we talk about it like, you're even the name imposter and syndrome, and it's like this, when really very often it's an expression of I am stretching, and so I do not feel competent in this yet, and thus I'm afraid to be found out because I'm falling into this false trap of if I don't have all the answers already, I'm doing it wrong. But like that's, I think, something where it's like by and large often perceived as like, fraudulent and whatever, and really it's a very natural expression of growth. And then I want to say also overthinking, when we call it just being thorough. But it's not that's a bit more like of a subtle distinction, because again, I'm not advocating for just make any decision without thinking about it twice, right? But I think there are quite a few people who are like, no, I just like to think things through. But what they're really doing is overthinking and stalling, which again, then is self-sabotage.
This is a really subtle one, because that's what is the line, right? Where you've been thorough enough versus you're veering into overthinking. And it's different for every decision you're making, isn't it? Like some decisions require a little bit more thoroughness, some require less.
Of course.
Your Canva colors, are not the same as like moving
where you live
cities,
or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Totally.
But sometimes we spend the same amount of time on them. What do you think? And this is kind of where I want to get into. I know you have a resource that helps with this, which is like uncovering what are your success blockers. I know you've got a quiz on this. Can you talk a little bit about what that quiz focuses on, how people can access it, and then maybe also like 1 or 2 questions that they might ask themselves right now if they haven't already started to identify some of these success blockers?
Quick, fun little quiz. It'll probably take less than 2 minutes to complete. Yeah, it really, that's what it does. It kind of says, what is your actual success blocker? Like, let's find out. And then there's a series of questions that guides you through that. And you get a really lovely, I really put a lot of work into this, so I say this now, a really like thorough results page that will kind of describe what your symptoms are, but then also what the drivers for that will be most commonly are and what you can do about it. So that's really where it helps people and where I get a lot of amazing feedback. So that's lovely. I think I'll just share the link with you, and then you can pop that in the show notes, and that's how people can probably best access it. As far as if they're not so sure what their success blocker is or anything like that, and if they've maybe never even thought about it this way, I think the most powerful question to ask yourself is, what am I afraid of? And that's a big one. I get it. It's a big one, but it often is connected to whatever the success blocker will be. And then, for example, actually my deepest, darkest fear is like, what will everybody from high school think about me posting online? I say laughingly, but I literally have not met an entrepreneur who can't relate to this, because they've met someone who felt that way or felt that way themselves or whatever it was. I'm fearing judgment from people who I might not even be in touch with anymore, but that is like a core piece for me. And that might show up in, I think that if I make it perfect, then they can't judge me, or I'm going to stall actually doing it because then they can't judge me, right? Like, again, that is a core piece. And often when you ask yourself that question, you approach these things like, what am I actually avoiding here? What am I afraid is going to happen if I do or do not do this? Can already unlock quite a bit of insight when you are willing to be so honest with yourself and paying attention to, where you're going in circles or where you keep refining things. It's like, what am I afraid of if I release this as just as it is now? Like, what's going to happen? With a website, often it's like, oh, nobody's going to like it. I don't know. And then you just improve it. Like, it's like, it's deeper than that. It's like, oh, they're going to judge and they're going to think I'm not an expert. And so like, oh no, they're not going to take me seriously anymore, et cetera, et cetera. Probably a starter question that is quite powerful if confronting.
This is a good one though, because it's if I'm delaying on something or I'm struggling with something, I can just say, okay, what is the real fear here? And when you were talking about, I don't remember if it was a psychiatrist or a hypnotist, two different things I know, about how the two deepest, what you had said, one of them, the two deepest fears we have are fear of judgment and fear of lack, like that we lack something. And I definitely can see how when you're doing stuff like this, one of those comes up and you have to say, okay, well, what if I just go ahead? What will really, really happen? And most people don't even realize they're in their own world, right? They don't even realize what you're doing half the time. I post something like 20 times 100%. And people have seen it once.
Absolutely. And this is again where, spotlight effect, we think everybody's watching and waiting for us to fail. And really they're all worried about not falling themselves. And so that's very important to remember. But I also feel like often the only way to embody that is by doing it, right? So now I don't know how you felt when you first started posting or whatever. It'd be interesting to discuss if you have the time. But now you're like, I post something 20 times and people see it like maybe once. Like you have developed this attitude of like, it's just a post. The very first time you posted, it was perhaps like, let me make sure. And so you have to have that lived experience. And so as annoying as it is to say to people, even when we do this deeper inner work, they still think that they're going to reach a point where it's then going to feel comfortable to do whatever they want to do. And again, whether that's showing up online for the first time, whether that's releasing a new offer, whether that's raising prices, doesn't matter what it is, it's still not going to feel comfortable. I'm so sorry, but you're going to be addressing the real issues versus just a sense like keeping yourself in this loop of symptoms, right? It's very much like if I have a headache, I could take a painkiller and then I can make the headache away. But if the reason for the headache is something that is deeper and the headache keeps recurring, I'm going to perform a lot less to whatever standard I want to perform to, and my outcomes are going to be worse. But I just keep taking the painkiller to make the headache go away instead of working from the root. And so that is it. That doesn't mean, though, that whatever you're doing is not still going to be uncomfortable, because you need to have that lived experience.
You've been doing this a while. I've been doing this a while. And I don't think there's ever a moment, maybe not even a week, where there isn't something that feels a little uncomfortable in terms of what you're doing. If you are continuing to try to grow and build and experiment, I could say maybe there's a day, but I definitely don't think there's a week where something like this doesn't come up, no matter how many years you have. But it's what you're saying, where if you recognize it a little bit easier, it doesn't feel as show-stopping as it did the first time, or when you're completely blind and you have no idea why you're feeling blocked or why you're sabotaging, why you're avoiding.
First, I want to reiterate that and say, like, absolutely, it's 100% that way. And I also often like to remind people, it's like, what you see me doing now is not how I was doing it when I first started. Like, it's like people go like, oh, I'm like literally like scroll all the way down my feed. Like, you can see how, like, what I do now is not how I used to do it. And you can do the same. Like, you can evolve, and that's beautiful. And again, don't compare somebody else's 100th day to your first or whatever it might be. And the second piece is that I would venture a guess, and I'm curious to hear if you agree with this, but what I notice changes with clients, but also when I observe myself, and when I bring the theory to it, is your level of self-trust. When you first hit a challenge and you don't know what to do and you're like, and then you have the tools and you address the real causes and whatever, so you find a way to move through it, even if it's uncomfortable. You come out the other side of that. Again, we don't have to make it life-changing, but even if we say it's a 1% change in how much you trust yourself to figure the next thing out, that is what changes. So it's not that the challenges go away. It's not that the discomfort goes away. It's not that we're never afraid, you and I mean now, or anyone else who's even further along or whatever it is. It is that we have built through experience and through doing the thing and addressing the real causes and enough self-trust to be like, I can handle that. Even if it challenges me and it's uncomfortable and all those things, I can come out the other side. And again, that's where it's like this embodiment, this lived experience. As much as you can think about self-trust and start reworking self-trust in these small ways in your everyday life as well, that is the key pillar that, in my experience, changes. It's never the outside that changes. It's just how you handle the outside.
I didn't have the word for it when I was thinking of it, but it's definitely what you said, that the feeling of I can get through this instead of the shock of what the heck is happening, what am I going to do? It definitely is that. And each time a little bit more, which is why you have to keep going, keep refining, because otherwise you don't build that self-trust because you just abandon and start something new. And I've done it, which is why I say it. But I think the self-trust in everything, like even in wellness, I noticed this too, where you just start to really trust your body, you trust your decisions, and everything flows so much easier.
I agree. And I think that's is a good point that you're making now with wellness too, where maybe people can relate to it a bit more, where I think hopefully more people have had the lived experience of, like, let's say I used to be someone who didn't like working out, or I didn't work out, or whatever it is. And then I moved through this uncomfortable phase where I hold myself to it and I do it and I get accountability buddies and I do all the things, whatever. I make it enjoyable. Again, there's so many things I could do about, getting myself to a point where I do it. And then eventually I can quote unquote fall off the wagon and I can skip a few weeks because I'm on holiday or whatever, because I don't doubt. I have this level of like, I understand that I am now a person who does this consistently, whether or not I do it perfectly for the next 2 weeks or not. I trust, and I have built this identity around, I am a person who works out. And those things go together. And, as much as there's no interest, I wish we had more time, because like, then we can talk about like identity work, which is such a big piece. Again, I mentioned earlier, right? Like that these blockers are often driven by a belief system and a thought system. Like if I say over and over and over again to myself or others, I am a perfectionist, I'm driving that home. I'm identifying with that, right? And so I can start working at an identity level of like, how else can I perceive myself? And that can inform my action as well. And those things can kind of come and meet the lived experience, self-trust, I can figure this out ability, as well as the, I guess, more fast track, let's work on your belief system, your thoughts, let's shift those because they're going to come into that. And that's what's going to create the change for you.
This is where, if you want to know more, I'm going to say it now because you're right. Like we don't have more time, but we know that there is, especially the identity piece. I know that you talk so much more about it. So I am going to leave resources for people to find you. But I'll say for now that if people want to know more about, especially this identity piece, which really holds so much of this together, to connect with you. And I want to thank you so much for sharing and being such an incredible guest to give really freely the stuff that you're also sharing with clients, giving these action plans, giving these strategies. It says so much about the work that you do and how much you believe in it, that you do that. So thank you. And every time I speak to you, I mean, this is twice, but it feels like the 10th time, I'm energized. So thank you
I'm
so much.
glad. I'm so glad. I appreciate that. And when people do reach out, I always love like when they say, oh my gosh, I listened to this and this is what connected, or just like, I'm a person. And like, I feel like sometimes people, when they like see a large following or something, they forget that. But like, I love people stuff, like just connect, quite normally. I would love that. And I'm so glad that you, are energized and that you've taken something from this conversation. I think that there's so much in the realm of, let's call it mental mastery by and large. It's so big. And so I never hold back on sharing whatever I can in the whole hour that we've given, or the time that we're given. So I don't want to gatekeep anything. I want to share as much as I can for free, which is also what I do on Instagram. Yeah, going to pay off tenfold when they do.
This is the end of this series. Part 3 is done. If you missed any of the other parts, go back, listen to them, and really implement. Now, as Charlotte said, we would really love to get feedback. We would love to know what resonated for you in this episode. So please share it in a review. What stuck out here? I'll see you in the next one.